Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
WBSM presents Spooky Southcoast with your hosts Tim Weisberg and Matt Costa.
Good evening and welcome to Spooky Southcoast. Tim Weisberg here along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Maloney. The gang is all here tonight and we are ready for another terrific program where we talk to you about the paranormal as we do each and every Saturday night. I have a little bit of a cold, so I sound way more sexier than I really am. It's my Barry White voice, baby. So if you want to turn down the lights and start a fire and have your sweetie sit next to you on the couch, I'll have my nice toe. It's almost like what Moni sounds like all the time.
Oh God! Please help us all.
Well, you've been blessed with a great voice. So the only problem is that most of the time when you're using it, it's yelling at people.
True.
More than anything else. But I don't think you'll yell at tonight's guest too much. I think you guys are going to have a lot to talk about. Because tonight we're going to be joined by Mack Maloney. He's the author of the new book, UFOs and Wartime.
I talked with him before. He was a guest of ours on 30 Odd Minutes.
And he's put out this book. It's his first nonfiction book, I believe, which is very interesting. We're going to talk to him about how his fiction career led into the creation of this book. And I'm going to show it on the cameras on Spooky TV at SpookySouthcoast.com. So if you want to check out what's going on in the Spooky Studio during the course of the show, just go to SpookySouthcoast.com, where you can jump into the chat room there as well, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and a lot of stuff popping up in the chat room during the course of the night. You can always call in at any time as well, 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420, as we talk about UFOs and wartime with our guest, Mack Maloney. And also a little bit later on, we're going to be joined for a few minutes by Peter Robbins, our friend and UFO researcher, who has a couple of events coming up that he's going to be speaking at. But I also want to have him talk with Mac a little bit about the Bentwaters cage, which is, of course, Peter's specialty. So it should be fun talking about that a little bit later on. We almost had a UFO incident on the way in, Boney.
It was interesting.
Yeah, as we were driving here from Wareham, coming up 195, we saw a very low shooting star.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing actually made Earth impact.
And it's the lowest one that I've ever seen. You said that we've actually been passing through a meteor shower.
Yeah, there was a meteor shower that we passed through a couple of days ago. There was also a couple of near-Earth asteroids that came by between the Earth and Moon this week, yesterday and today.
Well, if anybody out there had any sightings tonight that you want to report to us, spookycrew@SpookySouthcoast.com is our email. You can let us know anytime. Matt Costa, how about yourself? You see anything coming in on your way in?
No, I wasn't really paying attention.
He's like, no, I wasn't. I had my eyes closed the whole time I was driving. Alright. Well, somebody who has been paying attention is Mack Maloney, and he's joining us on the line right now to talk about his new book, UFOs and Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. And let me give you Mack's intro here, because he's had a pretty interesting background. He grew up in the Dorchester section of Boston and was taught to read and write by the nuns at St. Anne's School. So, automatically there you know that the back of his hands are still red from learning. His father was a veteran of World War II, and he used to read military books all the time. As a child, Mack started reading them too, along with a lot of science fiction. He received a BS in journalism, and anybody can tell you that if you work in journalism, it's all BS, and a graduate degree in filmmaking from Emerson College. He was a sports reporter for 2 years after college before joining corporate America as a publicist for General Electric Company. Mack started writing books in 1984, and has been doing it full-time since 1987, penning over 30 books. And he joins us now on the line. Good evening, Mack. Welcome to Spooky Southcoast. How you doing?
Hi. How you doing?
And I can say that, we put the BS in journalism because being one myself, I know that to be true. We had fun talking about some sports reporter memories the other day.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we were both. I was a sports reporter. Well, man, more than 20 years ago.
And I can tell you that a lot of those guys are still around, and a lot of them are still just as grouchy as they were back then.
Still getting all the free meals from the Red Sox and.
Oh, I think the Red Sox charge $9 now for the pregame meal.
Oh, you're kidding?
And I think the Celtics, they want like a $5 donation.
Oh, that's awful.
Patriots are still free though. So.
Well, that's good.
Until I just said that now. Next season will be. If they win the Super Bowl, I'm sure we'll be paying.
Yep.
So you come from the background now of writing a lot of fiction works. You have the Wingman series, Chopper Ops, Starhawk, Superhawks. So you become known for a lot of these titles. What made you make the decision to write a nonfiction book about UFOs?
Well, it just came up in I was having lunch with my editor one day, and I had always been a fan of UFOs. I was a fan of UFO books. I used to read UFO books all the time as a kid, and also, as you mentioned earlier, there was a lot of military books around my house because my father was into that a lot. So somehow or other, the two ideas kind of crossed that UFOs just seem to show up a lot during times of war or as we're getting ready to go to war. And I just mentioned this to my editor once, and he said, that might make an interesting book, but it would have to be a nonfiction book. So we just kind of took it from there. That was about 3 years ago, and the book's been out for about a month now.
And I knew I'd heard a lot of these stories, especially, doing Spooky Southcoast now. We just celebrated our 6th anniversary just 2 days ago. And so I've been talking with Mack Maloney about UFOs for a long time, and I knew that, it wasn't uncommon for there to be military associations with UFOs, but after reading this book, I'm just amazed at not only the wealth of reports that happen, but the fact that they're happening from all sides, no matter what the conflict.
Mm-hmm. At first, when I first had the idea, I thought, well, why would this be? Because it just seemed like, I would, like I said, I would read UFO books, and a lot of them seem to have to do with the military or right before a war started or during war. And I was thinking, especially in the 20th century, is it because, once planes were brought into, wartime and the World War I, obviously, and is it that there are more people up there flying around and they're seeing more of these things, or are there more people on the ground looking up in the air? I couldn't really figure out why that would happen, but the more I get into it, and as you said, there's just such a wealth of evidence, it just seems to me that whatever UFOs are, they are attracted to watching us, keeping an eye on us when we're at war. It's almost as if they're observing us or watching, history as it's being made, let's say. So, I don't know. I found it more fascinating as the research went on. Not a lot of answers, but just kind of fascinating in the evidence itself.
Well, I definitely agree with you that they seem to be watching over us. Oh, geez, that's amateur hour. Sorry. Set phasers to start. But you're definitely right when you say that there's a pattern of them seeming to observe what goes on. But as I was reading the book and as I'm reading all these accounts, I'm starting to wonder if maybe they're also not thinking, if ever we wanted to get a really good up-close and personal look at what these militaries are doing, let's do it during war, because they're always just going to think we're the other side.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I agree with you. What I really started to leave early in the research, and then by the time I was through, I think I'm really coming around to this line of thinking. I'm not the first one to come up with this, but I really think that there's a good chance that they're people from our future who have come back to, as I said before, see history being made. There's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say evidence, but there's a lot of things that kind of point towards that, and away from the kind of ET scenario, though, who knows, but it just seems to me that, and I've said this many times, is that if you have a vehicle, some kind of an aerial vehicle, as reported, let's say, during World War II with the Foo Fighters, which is just, fantastic looking and has all these fantastic capabilities, then why would you choose to, ride 100 feet off the wing of a Lancaster bomber as it's bombing Berlin in the middle of the night, with the anti-aircraft fire and night fighters and so on and so forth? Why would you do that if not just to see, as I say, history being made? So, I don't know. I'm coming around to this whole kind of time traveler's theory.
I've always liked that theory too myself, especially when you hear about the ancient astronauts, and you hear about these ships that visited people in the early days of history and kind of lent a guiding hand then. So I've always hoped that it's just us, perpetuating, not to sound all Disney-ish, but the circle of life, and to make sure that we're helping out the past. But at the same time, you would think that wartime, if any time they felt like they needed to intervene, it would be during a time of war or conflict.
Well, that's true, but someone said to me the other day, well, what if, because there are very, very few instances of UFOs actually interfering in wartime, though we do have, I think, 4 or 5 stories in the book where UFOs kind of take, let's say, offensive action. But someone said the other day, well, what would have happened if the Nazis, if it looked like they were going to win the war? Would they have intervened then, meaning the UFOs? So who knows? It just seems like it might be one way of looking at it, that our history is unfolding, quote unquote, just as it should. And but there are times where it does look like they kind of take some action that just turns it just a little bit in the direction of, well, let me put it this way: if they are from our future, that means that we have a future, which is kind of an optimistic way of looking at it. But like I say, it's all really one big puzzle, and we're just trying to get it together a piece at a time. But the time travel theory, I like it, and I guess a lot of other people like it too.
Well, in reading the book, one of the things that I realized is, I've always we've heard of the Foo Fighters, these World War II UFO sightings, and I'd even heard a little bit about some stuff in World War I. But you bring it all the way back, to Emperor Constantine in those times. I mean, this has been going on for many, many, many years.
Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
Even before that.
I think it's really been going on throughout human history. We kind of begin the book with the story about Alexander the Great, where he was on one of his campaigns. I believe he was in eastern Persia, and he was going to cross this strategic river, and these flying, as they described them, flying shields showed up and started buzzing his army to the point where his cavalry and his war elephants wouldn't go across the river. And then about 2 years later, he was laying siege to a city called Tyre, which is in modern-day Lebanon, is the city that's out in the harbor, and his troops were building causeways out to the city to attack it. And as soon as they had finished these causeways, these shields showed up again, and as the story goes, shot something at the walls of the city, breaking them down and allowing Alexander's troops to go in. So this is an example of where the UFOs actually had a hand in, these campaigns. In one, it seems like they didn't want him to do something, and then the other, they were helping him do something. So, but that's just one of many stories. I mean, UFOs are mentioned in the Bible and so on, and so I just think they've been around as long as we've been around.
Well, you mentioned the Bible. We've talked on this show in the past about speculation that the Star of Bethlehem might have actually been a UFO, and that would kind of fit into, in my opinion, that future human theory of, that if ever there was a moment they wanted to go back and witness, I would think it would be that one.
Okay, yeah, sure. And then the story we also have in 300 AD, where you had mentioned before, Constantine I was about to have a battle right outside of Rome, and whoever won it was going to be the next emperor of Rome. And the day before, he and his troops saw a UFO that was shaped like a cross, and the people, the seers who were traveling with his army, told him that this was a sign from above, let's say, and he came to believe that if his troops drew crosses on their shields, that they would win the battle. So he ordered them to do that, and they did. And even though they were the underdogs, they won the battle the next day. And one of the first things he did was make Christianity the official religion of Rome. So, I mean, it sounds strange, but there's not a good chance, but there is a possibility that the reason that Christianity is such a widespread religion these days is, it might be linked back to a UFO sighting.
We already have our first question from the chat room. Low Battery Dave says that if they are indeed future humans, though, if there was a crash, wouldn't they want to do something to be able to come back and cover that up?
Well, maybe they have.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
I mean, it's let's put it this way, and I've said this before, is let's say that a UFO lands on the White House lawn on July 1st, 2018. That means that they know that date, the date that UFOs will be exposed as time travelers. Well, they can do anything up to that date because they know the history that we don't. So, who knows? If they have the ability to travel in time or to travel in these unbelievable aerial vehicles that we see them in, they have the ability to do a lot of things. And I think maybe covering up a crash or covering up prior contact or something, is well within their capability.
Well, I think from reading the book, it seems like the modern idea of UFOs in wartime probably comes about in the early 1900s. And there was definitely a couple of flaps of strange sightings that don't really fit anything that was going on at the time. I mean, we're talking about the early days of flight. And when Wilbur and Orville were just barely able to, ride that bicycle fast enough to get the takeoff going. And from what you've been reporting here in the book, it seems like there were some pretty fascinating airships that were in the air not long after that.
Right. In 1909, there was a flap in England that they came to be known as the scare ships. And this is one of my favorite chapters of the book. Basically, what happened was in April of 1909. Now, this is 5 years before World War II began. People in the eastern part of England started seeing these huge objects going over. They looked like Zeppelins. They were about the size of Zeppelins, but they were clocked, some of them are going around 250 miles an hour, flying against the wind. They were only seen at night, and they had these huge searchlights on the bottom of them shining down on the ground below. And even though the Germans actually had just invented the Zeppelin, they had no war Zeppelins, and they had no Zeppelins that could make the 700-mile round trip from Germany to England, and certainly not be able to do it at night. So exactly what these airships were, no one ever found out, but they were seen for almost the entire year of 1909. There were more than one of them, because people would sometimes see two or three of them at a time. They were reported in different parts of the UK at the same time. They were reported as far away as Northern Ireland. And actually, there was an airship scare in the United States in the late 1800s. But no one ever figured out exactly what the scare ships were. It was almost as if, and we have a couple other examples in the book of this, where people were seeing a technology that was a little bit ahead of its time. If these things were seen over England 5 or 6 years later, then they would have been Zeppelins. But it was impossible for these things to be Zeppelins in 1909.
And I think that's probably what got people, staring more at the skies. When you have something that's that widespread publicly, everybody wants to be the next person to see it, or to be the first person to see the next flag.
Well, that's right. And even right before, when World War II started, World War I started in 1914. There's another story in there where when Zeppelins did start bombing the UK, the British had yet to come up with an idea of how to shoot down Zeppelins. They eventually came around to incendiary bullets, which would shoot at a Zeppelin and would just blow it out of the sky. But before they had come upon that idea, what they used to do is they used to send airplanes up, unarmed airplanes up, over London, over the major cities, just to see if Zeppelins were coming. It was almost like an early warning system, a crude early warning system. And one of them, 1914, a guy was up there and he saw this incredible cigar-shaped object up very close, came right up to it. He thought it was just another kind of a Zeppelin, and he shot at it. He had a pistol with him, and he shot at it, and it took off at tremendous speed. But we have kind of determined that was probably the first time anyone has shot at a UFO while in flight. But these things were seen a lot over England right in the run-up to World War I. And as you say, all of a sudden you have lots of people looking up at the skies. That means you're going to have more witnesses to things like this.
And I think that at least back then there wasn't the stigma attached. I would assume with having a UFO sighting like what's happened now, and I'm sure a lot of that is part of the disinformation aspect of things. In the later part of the 20th century, but back then, I'm sure that nobody's credibility was called into question if they reported these things.
Well, it was a little more innocent back then, but it's funny you say that, because the first person who saw a scare ship in 1909 in England was a constable, and as the media got a hold of it in England, they have a real kind of rabid tabloid mentality. Media still, it's like that today, but it was like that back then as well. And after the story kind of broke, people went to his boss, the chief of police in Peterborough, England, where it first all started, and his boss actually disavowed any comment that the constable had made, and they made up these stories about what he had actually seen was a Chinese kite that was flying with candles attached to it, and any noise that was associated with it, with some motor running in a bakery or something. They came up with this crazy story to kind of, disavow what he had said. So the innocent stopped pretty quickly there as far as the scare ships were concerned. And then, as you say, by the time we get to the late 40s and the 50s, there's definitely disinformation campaign by the CIA to, make sure that anyone who reports UFO is ridiculed, and that's still in place today.
you know, it seems like even back then they were quick to blame the Chinese kites and the Chinese lanterns and
Right.
all these things that we still blame them on today.
Right.
Well, one of the questions that came up in the chat room from our friend Chops was about the Tunguska incident. Am I saying that right? In the Soviet Union. And do you have any thoughts on that incident?
You know, we don't have anything in the book about it, but it was funny. I was just watching something, I think, on the Discovery Channel 2 days ago about that, and I don't know. You know, I mean, what could that have been? That destruction that happened out there just went for hundreds of miles, and I know some people think that it was some kind of a comet or meteor or something, asteroid hitting the Earth, but there's nothing right at the ground zero. They say the tree, that was the only place the trees were still standing, so it looked like some kind of an airburst situation. I don't know. I mean, that's really a huge mystery. All I can think of is, what if something like that happened today? People would just freak out. But just the fact that it happened in one of the most remote parts of this planet also adds to the mystery.
Well, the part that really makes it mysterious is it made 3 separate turns before it finally exploded.
Yeah, people saw it maneuvering. I don't know. You think that they would, I mean, I think that you could probably go back to that area and do something and look for almost have like an archaeological dig or something.
Well, they've already been doing. There's been several research groups that have gone out there, and they've found these weird metallic little spheres or spheroids that they have no idea how the hell they got there, or what they're really made of, or let's put it this way, their composition is not a means in which we would naturally be able to produce today.
Right, man, that's strange. The whole thing is a really strange story.
And it wasn't like there was anything going on in Russia in 1908 that UFOs would be interested in. Not a first revolution or anything.
Well, most people don't realize that it was originally seen over England. It came in from the north, and it crossed over England, headed through Europe, and then crossed as the Earth was turning, or it was going around. It passed over into the Siberian area, and then made a couple of different turns. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't just seen just in Tunguska. It was watched across Europe.
Well, but I mean, at the same time, too, you're in the midst of that first Russian Revolution, so
Yeah, well,
there was definitely something there to check out if they were interested. All right, well, as we moved into World War I, and this I found fascinating because you're having World War I fighter pilots on both sides that are seeing these craft that are well beyond anything that they're flying, and you would think that's being the first real air war, that they would have the most state-of-the-art equipment that they were flying around up there, and some of these things that they were seeing, just they're beyond what we could even do today.
Right. I mean, it's another instance where, in the case of the spear ships and also the Scandinavian Ghost flights in 1934 and also the Ghost rockets in 1946, you have these instances where what people are seeing are not your typical UFOs, but it just seems to be these things that are almost earthly technology, but 5, 10, 15 years ahead of its time. But then on the other hand, you have, there were sightings in World War I over the trenches. There's the story of the Angels of Mons, which is an odd story. There's the story of the sighting at Fatima, which is usually given a religious connotation. But if you subtract the religious angle to Fatima, I mean, what you have is on one day, 60,000 people out in the field saw a disc that was spinning and throwing off sparks and moving all over the sky, and people thought it was the sun, and it came so close to some people on the ground that it dried their clothes, and it rained earlier that day. I mean, the whole Fatima story is just fascinating. Like I say, if you take the religious angle out of it, it could be one of the largest sightings of a UFO in history. So a lot of strange things were happening from the beginning of the 20th century on. These things really started to ramp up, no doubt about it.
Well, we just had a guest on last week. We were joined by Tom Fusco, and he was talking about taking the religion aspect out of a lot of things. And he also talked about that sighting in his book, where he said, if it wasn't a religious event, if it didn't have that connotation to it, it might be the most important UFO sighting of all time. And I think that so many of these miraculous events that have happened over time, and we talked about UFOs being in the Bible, but you can almost put the spaceman or the future human theory to the test when talking about a lot of these religious experiences for people.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the Fatima story, which was basically three kids in a field who had this visitation first from quote-unquote an angel who told them that they were going to have this major visitation, and then later on this happens where they see this, beautiful woman who, everyone just assumed was the Blessed Virgin Mary from from Catholic religion, and she would appear to these three kids, only to the kids, on the same day of the month for about 6 months. At the time, Portugal was in World War I, but they went in kicking and screaming. Let's put it that way. A lot of Portuguese soldiers were killed on the front, and it kind of put this negative aspect throughout all of Portugal as far as war was concerned. Even though the Portuguese government was anti-religion, the people in Portugal were very religious. So, these kids are having this visitation on a regular basis, and more people are coming to this field where they're having this visitation. And I think it went from like 100 people to 1,000 people. In the following month, there was 10,000 people. And then finally, the final one we were just talking about, there was like 60,000 people there. There were newspaper reporters, there were doctors, there were intellectuals there, and there's even pictures of this happening. And as you said, you're talking about it. If you can subtract the religious element from this, it's a fantastic sighting.
And it's one that, you've got so many people that would swear by what they saw, as long as you allow them to say that it was a miraculous sighting.
You get away with it, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Well, you make the same connection with, say, like what happened in Medjugorje. Now, what happened in that country afterwards? A heavy-duty ethnic cleansing war.
That's right. Right, and there's a lot of parallels to Fatima and Medjugorje as well. Three kids, and they're the only ones who, claim to see it, and so on. And the country is in the middle of political turmoil. I saw a film once of those three kids from Medjugorje, and the strange thing about it is, I think that they would have this visitation in a little chapel, and there'd be a lot of people around them, but all three kids, at least in this film, just hit their knees at the exact same time. And I remember watching it saying, you couldn't, if this was fake, you couldn't coordinate that perfectly like that. So in my mind, it just seemed like, well, they must be seeing something, and it must have been the same thing in Fatima too.
Well, I think, my plan was kind of to attack a lot of these sightings in a chronological fashion tonight, but I think we're going to kind of skip around quite a bit, because some different things are popping up in the chat room, and I'm sure some people will call in, and you can call in to talk to Mack Maloney, our guest tonight, at 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. And like I said, coming up in the beginning of the second hour, we're going to be joined for a few minutes by Peter Robbins to talk about a couple of events he has coming up. But while we have him on the phone, Mac, I want you guys to talk a little bit about both the Bentwaters case, which is one of Peter's bread and butter. It's the case that he spent most of his years researching. And then I also want to talk a little bit then about the Roswell case, too, because I think you guys have some different perspectives on the Roswell case. So I want to get into all that more. But one of the questions that just popped up in the chat room, moving a little bit more toward the World War II era, is somebody had a question about the Battle of Los Angeles and what you think about that whole phenomenon, because that's another major sighting.
Well, we went into this in really good detail in the book, and I'll just give you the short version for anyone who doesn't know what happened. In February 24th of 1942, just a little while after Pearl Harbor happened, the Navy thought that reported that naval intelligence said that Los Angeles was going to be bombed that night by the Japanese. Now, you got to remember, at that time, LA had about 2 million people, but they also had a lot of defense plants there. So they had a lot of anti-aircraft guns around the defense plants, and a lot of military and civil defense people in the city. So, when the naval intelligence said that, it looks like there's some kind of a bombing raid coming, people took it seriously. So all the anti-aircraft guns were manned that night, and the city was, let's say, on high alert. The day before, a Japanese submarine had surfaced off the city about 90 miles north of Los Angeles, and had shelled an oil refinery. And there were people back then who thought that the Japanese were physically going to invade the west coast of America. So we're in the middle of this real war jitters situation. So around 2 o'clock that night, or early that morning, these things start showing up on radar. Lots of objects coming in chevron formations, coming in over the ocean and over Los Angeles itself. So they ordered the anti-aircraft batteries to open up, and for about the next 2 hours, there was this quote-unquote battle where there was so much ordnance shot up into the sky that the expended ordnance that fell back to the ground killed 6 people on the ground, did a lot of major property damage. Air raid sirens went off, of course, and they figured that at least 1 million people saw these things overhead. There was a very famous picture that we have in the book that we used thanks to the Los Angeles Times, who owns it, of a flying saucer caught in a bunch of searchlights and being fired on by anti-aircraft guns. If you look at the picture, it looks like nothing other than a flying saucer. And this went on for about 2.5 hours. Then the UFOs finally moved away, and everyone stopped firing. And the next day was just total confusion. The Navy insisted nothing happened, but the Army insisted that something did happen. They just didn't know what. And then about a day later, the war censors came in and just put a clampdown on any information about it, and the story kind of went away. But once again, it's one of these situations where so many people saw it, and in the book we quote newspaper people and military people and also law enforcement people. I mean, they think about 1 million people saw these things, and it's just amazing that this story isn't more well known in the U.S. But like I say, because war censors came in and just shut everything down, not a lot of people knew it happened even back then.
Well, also you mentioned the Los Angeles Times, but there was quite a few newspaper reporters on hand to have those sightings.
I think there was 6 newspapers in Los Angeles at the time, and they all had reporters out there that night. A lot of them were on the top of buildings with law enforcement people, and they all saw these things, with the naked eye or with binoculars. And there was at one point that the Army floated a rumor that what they really were airliners disguised, bombers disguised as airliners that were being flown out of a secret base in Mexico by the Japanese. And as I said before, that sounds like a really bad movie plot to me, and of course it wasn't true. And then when the war was over, they asked the Japanese specifically, did you have any aircraft over Los Angeles that night? And they said no. In fact, the Japanese didn't have the capability, like an aircraft carrier or something along those lines, to get close enough to Los Angeles to launch something like that. So just what happened, no one knows. There was never any official investigation, but just from that photo alone, I mean, it's really startling evidence that something looking like a UFO was over Los Angeles that night. And
that was, just the very, very tip of the iceberg with some of these UFO sightings that happened during World War II. We mentioned earlier in the show the idea of the Foo Fighters, and you actually recount in the book the actual incident in which Foo Fighters got their name. And I mean, of course, the UFOs, not the rocket.
People have seen Foo Fighters from, they just hadn't got their name yet. They'd been seeing them since almost the very beginning of the war, when the air war started over Europe, when Britain started bombing Germany, and lasted right out through the entire European theater, and also a lot in the Pacific theater, too. I have to give a shout-out, let's say, to Keith Chester, who is the guy who wrote a book about 5 years ago called Strange Company, and that's like the Bible on Foo Fighters. He did an amazing amount of research going back into old records of the 8th Air Force, British Bomber Command, and the U.S. Navy to really come up with a lot of incidents of Foo Fighters that we had never heard about before, until him. So, but actually, they got their name late in the war. In 1944, there was a night fighter squadron that was based in France, the 415 Night Fighter Squadron. They flew these big kind of two-engine British fighters that were on loan to the U.S. And they, for whatever reason, this squadron saw more Foo Fighters than any other U.S. or British outfit during World War II in the European theater. And they saw so many of them, they decided we should give them a name. And there was a cartoon at the time where I think his name was Smokey Stover or something like that. He was a cartoon that was in the newspapers, and there was a term, he was a fireman, and the name of his fireman was the Foo Machine. So somehow or other they came up with Foo Fighters. And it just is just odd that the air unit that saw more Foo Fighters than any other air unit was also the one that wound up naming them. So they became the Foo Fighters from that point on.
And it just seemed like from all the different reports that you talk about in the book, there was a wide variety of ships being seen and a wide variety of lights too. It wasn't just any singular type of craft that you could point your finger on and be like, okay, this is an experimental thing. You know, it seems like there's a lot of different.
Right. I mean, they came in all shapes and sizes, for sure. You know, all the way to lots of kind of glowing balls of light or balls that seem like that they're on fire, to what they used to call unguided rockets. They just looked like rockets that would trail bombers, right up to your standard cigar-shaped objects that so many people have reported as UFOs throughout history. You know, and as you said, you know, a lot of people at the time thought that they were kind of like weapons. In fact, there are a lot of people even these days who think that, you know, that they were Nazi super weapons or whatever. But, you know, that can't be for several reasons. One of them is that, as I said, Keith Chester's book points out that, and we have a lot of stories in our book where, you know, there were a lot of Foo Fighters were seen over the Pacific theater as well. And also, there's no recorded incident or evidence that Foo Fighters ever shot at any of our airplanes, or shot at, took any offensive action with troops on the ground. After we won the war, we went into Germany, we didn't find any huge manufacturing facility where they would be able to make these fantastic machines. And then the final, reason why they couldn't have been Nazi super weapons is if that they had the technology to produce these weapons, why did they lose the war? So they weren't new Nazi super weapons, and I think that's just a way, you know, people keep repeating that story these days and writing books about it, but I think that's just a way of kind of keeping the idea of the Nazis alive. And frankly, I think we have better things to do with our time than to do that. So, like everything else, Foo Fighters, no one knows what they are. Lots of people saw them, but no one has any idea what they were. And when World War II was over, they just went away.
I have an interesting little observation. I talked to a number of pilots that actually encountered them from World War II over Germany and France and stuff. And one of the guys that I talked to, he was flying the bombers, and each bomber in a particular flight has various jobs. And his particular one, where he used to get all buzzed all the time by the Foo Fighters, is his plane was the one loaded with radar. Not every plane carries radar, and they would use radar to navigate themselves along the ground and stuff like that to judge heights, distances, and terrain and stuff, especially at night. And he said they would be buzzed. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the night fighters having the most amount of hits, I guess, with the Foo Fighters, because the night fighters also all flew in a radar pattern.
That's right. I mean, that's why
so high energy emission. So it makes sense. Why is this generating far more electronic emission?
Well, that could be because the 415 that I was talking about, the airplane they flew was a bow fighter, and even though they were called night fighters, it's actually a pretty large airplane, and
They're also equipped with radar.
Yeah,
that's how they fought at night. Correct.
They all had radar in those night fighting bow fighters. So, I never heard that before, but that actually kind of makes a lot of sense, because if you're emitting lots of radar, that can become a target for these things, or you attract them in some way.
Yeah, high energy emissions. Okay, why are you emitting all of this noise?
Right, and there's also a story in there in 1957 where, and it's kind of a famous story now, where there was a top secret RB-47 electronic countermeasures bomber that was out on a training mission out over the Gulf of Mexico, out over the Gulf of Mexico, flying over Louisiana and Texas, going back to its base in Oklahoma, was stalked by two UFOs for about 2 hours. I mean, all the people on the bomber saw them, and the UFOs were circling, and really quite an episode. And this particular bomber was just chock filled with like radar and ECM stuff and everything. So there might be some kind of a situation there where these things are attracted to radar emissions and so on. I'd never heard that before, but I really like that theory.
Well, like I said, I've been investigating UFOs for some years, and I got a chance to meet a number of bomber pilots back in the day when I was so alive. One of them was a good friend of mine, and he told me all about these encounters and what he was flying. I mean, he made a point to tell me my plane was one of the only ones usually in the flight that had all of this radar equipment on it. They were, in other words, he was the plane that was responsible for their radar navigation.
Right, like the Pathfinder.
Yeah, basically. And he said we were the ones that were always buzzed by the Foo Fighters.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I think the whole idea of the Foo Fighters, and I think the idea that these extraterrestrial or future beings, however you want to look at them, were coming back and observing what we were doing is intriguing. But what's even more intriguing is that they never seem to really get directly involved. But there are a few cases where they did take chase against some of the Allied forces.
Well, in World War II, do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's lots of them. Well, let me start say this. It's just to figure out that we only know about 10% of Foo Fighter reports in the European theater during World War II, and probably even less in the Pacific, because the U.S. Navy has yet to release their information on Foo Fighter sightings. Can you imagine that? So there could be somewhere in Washington, you know, this treasure trove of Foo Fighter reports that, you know, we haven't come upon yet. Keith also figures that only 10% were reported in the European theater because, as we were talking about earlier, you know, anyone who reported these things were, they would have their intelligence officers report whether the intelligence officer would question the crew whether they were drunk or not, because you just did not want to get sidetracked from what you were doing up there. What you were doing up there was bombing Germany into submission. And any idea of, you know, that these things were, you know, science fiction or from, you know, the Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and stuff like that, they really, really didn't want to make that connection. So,
but they were definitely real because they had made physical impacts. My buddy told me about one of his other buddies having the tail get whacked into by one of these things.
Oh yeah,
that created damage.
Oh yeah, there's you know, once again, there's, you know, who knows what we don't know. I would, you know, it's too bad that they discourage people from really giving full reports on these things. But there's even the story that came out while we were writing the book, and we were just able to get it in, where Winston Churchill was shown a picture of a Foo Fighter that was tailing a British reconnaissance plane. And when he saw it, he realized the implications of this right away. He right away jumped to the conclusion that this was something out of this earth, and he forbid that photo to be shown for 50 years because he was sure that if people on Earth thought that it was from another world, that our civilization would crash, our religion would crash. So he censored that photo for 50 years, and it's since been quote-unquote lost, so we'll never see it. But, you know, I mean, they were real. So many people saw them that they couldn't all be making up stories. Just what they were doing, who knows?
Well, we are talking with Mack Maloney. He's the author of UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. It's available from his website, mackmaloney.com. It's also linked up on the front page of SpookySouthcoast.com as well. We're going to take a break now for the news. When we come back on the other side, we'll also be joined by Peter Robbins, who will talk with us about some events that he has coming up, and we're going to get some crosstalk with him and Mack about the Bentwaters case, about Roswell, and then we'll talk a little bit more with Mack about some of the early cases of quote-unquote flying saucer sightings, because I want to get into some of that stuff as well, and we'll talk even more about some of the more modern sightings of UFOs in wartime. So stay tuned. We will be right back with more in just a few minutes. During the break, if you want to go to legendtrips.com, that's where you can go to purchase tickets to our Slater Mill event coming up on April 21st. So just go to legendtrips.com. All the info is right there. We'll be right back with more here on Spooky South Coast.
First, with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, AM 1420, WBSM, a Cumulus station.
From ABC News, I'm Chuck Severson. Herman Cain endorses Newt Gingrich, but will the ex-rival and former pizza magnate's nod mean more dough for Gingrich's campaign? A few hours ago to Republican fundraiser in West Palm Beach, Florida.
We are going to elect Speaker Newt Gingrich as the next president of the United States.
This comes just a week after Cain appeared with Stephen Colbert in South Carolina and endorsed the people. ABC's Jonathan Carlin, Pensacola.
Keep in mind that Sarah Palin has also been very supportive of Gingrich and very critical of Mitt Romney. So now you have Kane, you have Sarah Palin, and what Gingrich is saying is that this shows that he is the true conservative alternative to Mitt Romney.
The Romney campaign's running an unusual attack ad in Florida. It consists of nothing but an NBC nightly news report from the night Gingrich was fined. The NBC legal department's asking that the commercial be pulled. Tom Brokaw is said to be uncomfortable with his image being used for an extended time in a political ad, but no indication that the Romney campaign will scrap the ad. Tuesday's Florida primary is essentially now a two-man battle between Gingrich and Romney, with Rick Santorum and Ron Paul conceding because of Florida's winner-take-all delegates rule. Violence, tear gas, protesters allegedly throwing objects at police, all in Oakland, California hours ago, as police estimate Occupy demonstrators tried to camp out at 2 vacant buildings. Cops report 19 arrests. ABC's Kristen Haynes is on the scene.
They started just marching down the streets of Oakland, chanting, waving signs, and just wandering around, marching up and switching directions depending on where the police were. It was kind of like a game of cat and mouse for a while.
The beefs over higher beef prices aren't surprising, but maybe the reasons are. Experts say there are fewer cattle. Devastating drought in the plains also hurt ranchers. ABC's David Curley.
And there's another problem. We're not the only ones who like steak. The rest of the world does too. Exports were up 21% last year. They're expected to stay strong this year, so the price is really only expected to go up.
You're listening to ABC News.
Calling people using long distance was draining my wallet. So to save money, I'm only calling people with toll-free numbers. Do any of my friends have them? No. Any family members? Nope. No one I call has a toll-free number. So, Mom, if you're listening, I got your messages. Tell Cousin Tommy I hope all is well. And honestly, would it hurt you to look into an 800 number? I'm your only son, for crying out loud.
There's an easier way to save. Get online. Go to geico.com. Get a quote. Or follow this guy's toll-free penchant and call 1-800-947-AUTO.
Right now at the Home Depot, Behr Premium Plus Ultra Interior Paint starts at a new lower price of $29.38 a gallon. Its lowest price ever. It's paint and primer in one, so it takes fewer coats and less time to cover any old color with any new color. It's the perfect time to break out the rollers because Behr Premium Plus Ultra Interior Paint now starts at just $29.38. More saving, more doing. That's the power of the Home Depot. U.S. Home Industry Store for details.
Police search for clues as a 20-month-old girl is missing from her home in Maine for 6 weeks now.
Ayla Reynolds' mother attended a vigil for her daughter on Saturday, admitting she is frustrated with the pace of the investigation.
I'm ready to go knocking at people's doors myself because I want to know what happened to my daughter, and I want to know where she is and who took her.
The toddler was first reported missing by her father, Justin DePietro. Police have questioned him and 2 others who were with him at his home that night, but they say they don't believe they're getting the full story. Blood found in DePietro's home is also being analyzed. Sherry Preston, ABC News.
Just arrived in the U.S. hours ago, the embattled leader of Yemen for medical treatment, Ali Abdullah Saleh. This after Yemeni legislators approved a law giving him immunity from prosecution. Opponents say he's continued to interfere in the work of the new unity government through allies and relatives. The families of the 2 hostages rescued in Somalia by U.S. Special Operations Forces have released a letter. ABC's Kelly Kobiella with that from Italy.
They said that it was a relief that both Jessica and Paul had been released, that they're both healthy and unharmed. They were very grateful for the efforts to get them safely back to their families. So they essentially said they need some time to readjust now to be with Jessica and Paul, and they were grateful for the privacy that they've had up to this point.
ABC's Kelly Kobiella, and this is ABC News.
Do you have unfiled tax returns or owe the IRS or state more than $10,000? If you don't take action now, your tax problem is only going to get worse. Seizure of property, bank levies, wage garnishments, and potential criminal prosecution. Call the experts at U.S. Tax Shield for help at 1-800-334-5070. Our tax advisors will review your case for free, inform you of your rights, and give you a guaranteed quote. And we have an A+ rating with the BBB, so get protected. Call U.S. Tax Shield now at 1-800-334-5070.
Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
Can you tell if this burger contains bacteria that could cause kidney failure? Listen. Can't, can you? You can't see it either. There's only one way to tell if you've cooked meat and poultry to a bacteria-killing temperature. Use a food thermometer. It's not an extra step or a nice to have. Raw or undercooked meat may contain bacteria that can make you very sick, or worse. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year, and roughly 3,000 will die. But you can keep your family safer by using a food thermometer every time. Learn more about this and other important information. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov. That's foodsafety.gov. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
The Boston Bruins are going strong, and you can hear all the action from the Stanley Cup champions right here on AM 1420 WBSM. Whether the Bees are on the ice at TD Garden or on the road, you won't miss a play. Bruins Hockey, presented by Pilgrim Bank, Ralph's Auto Center, Sunrise Bakery and Coffee Shops, Advanced Financial Planners, and by the Worley Beds Factory Outlet. Your home for the Boston Bruins is right here on AM 1420 WBSM.
This is the story of Daniel, who was born 2 months early. His lungs weren't ready. His heart wasn't ready. His parents could only hope that one day he would leave the hospital healthy, and they would all live happily ever after. Daniel's is just one of the more than 500,000 stories of babies born prematurely last year. You can help the March of Dimes stop premature birth and bring more babies home healthy. Learn how at marchofdimes.com. Working together for stronger, healthier babies.
We love to sing, we love to dance, we admire beautiful women. We're human, and sometimes very human.
Beaming from the studios of AM 1420 WBSM into the night. Here's more of Spooky Southcoast.
Alright, welcome back into the show. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Moniz. We're going to get right back into the discussion about UFOs in wartime with our guest Mack Maloney in just a minute. Before we do that, we do have a few things we want to let you know about. Number one, and this is pretty important stuff, we want to pass along our condolences to the friends and family of Dawn Shy. She was a very well-known person in the paranormal field. She worked a lot. She called herself a power public. She worked a lot to help people get their name out there and to get recognition for their work. She passed away this week, so our condolences to her friends and family and to the paranormal community. And also, prayers and thoughts go out to Aaron Lee, who we will have on the show. Definitely want to have him on to talk about both the legacy of Baby Houdini and his own work. But he is having some medical issues right now, so thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family. I believe will be expecting well for them. Then also, I do want to kind of take it to a different direction. If you guys are out there, if you're hungry, you got to go out there and help us out with this. Our friend Jason owns Southcoast Ponies in Middleborough. Matt, did you end up going there the other night?
I did go there.
And how awesome?
It was pretty awesome.
And what? And what'd you have?
I had a Chicago Cup.
Yeah, what was on that?
I can't remember everything that was on it. There was a lot of stuff on it, and it was all good.
Yep.
And I had a Diablo Dog. Something like that.
The Devil Dog?
Yeah.
Oh, the one with the habanero relish?
Yeah.
How was that?
It wasn't as hot as I thought it would be, but it was still good.
Yeah. Did you have some of the tater tots that you guys there?
Yep, I did. I went all out.
And everything is so good. And it's cheap too. But
I wanted the they make a chili dog pizza.
Oh really?
They do, and I wanted to try it, but
well, your heart would have been in you having that like you.
Your heartburn would have been in it.
So, but listen. J-Rod's a great place over there. It's awesome food. It's cheap. It's a great place to eat. It's a great place to take the whole family. He has magicians in there for the kids, and he does a special on Wednesday night where you can get 99-cent pony dogs. I mean, he does all kinds of great things there. He's a great supporter of the community, too. And he's a big fan of Spooky Southcoast. So, he's kind of right up against it here. This is like the last week. If you can't raise the funds to stay open, it was going to shut down, like by Wednesday. So we need everybody out there to go up to Southcoast Ponies at 10 Merchants Way in Middleborough, Massachusetts, and go just chow down. Use as many hot dogs as you can possibly. Take hot dogs home. You know, even if you can't eat them all, buy a bunch, take them home. They're usually nicely. They're located again 10 Merchants Way in Middleborough. You can go to southcoastponies.com and check out the website, or you can go to my Facebook, Ken Weisberg on Facebook, and you'll find where they're from to there as well. So hopefully help save the mission. But if you can't, then I figure we'll all pony up some cash between the three of us. We'll at least make them an offer on the hot dogs. So I think we could probably find some pretty good uses for that. I'm thinking, next EDP's performance, isn't how Bigfoot was in the hot dog. But and again, speaking of Legend Trips events, again, legendtrips.com if you want to find out more about our Slater Mill event coming up on April 21st. Tickets are $99, and we also have a special room for you if you want to stay at the Comfort Inn in Pawtucket, Rhode Island as well. So you can also follow Legend Trips on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Now, before we get right back into the discussion with Mack about UFOs and Wartime, I want to bring on a good friend of the program, Peter Robbins, because he's got a couple UFO-related appearances coming up that we want to talk about. And then we'll also bring him into the discussion with Mack a little bit. Peter, you've got some pretty big stuff happening.
Hi, guys. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, you're excellent. How about you?
Okay. Yeah, I'm delighted to be on for a little bit and wish Mack all the best on the book. It sounds fascinating.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah. A number of things coming up. Actually going to moderating an extraordinary pair of speakers and then a panel discussion that follows at the end of March, actually March 31st, at a wonderful college in northwestern New York State. It's called Niagara County Community College, and I'll be there with my good friend Dr. David Jacobs and Linda Corteel, subject of Bud Hopkins' highly respected, extraordinary book, Witness, the true story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO abduction. I'll also be speaking at a small conference, Paranormal, in April. But the two big events will be coming up over the next couple of months are next month for the 20th or the 21st annual International UFO Congress, which last year was held in Phoenix for the first time. For the previous 19 years, it was held in a small town on the Arizona-Nevada border called Alpha, Nevada. And it was, well, truly the most legendary UFO-related event of the year in America. The original conference ran 7 days, 8 nights, and brought in more than 40 speakers from around the world, usually averaging an audience of 1,000 or so. Extraordinary UFO media kind of conglomerate, Open Minds. Some of your listeners, I'm sure, subscribe to Open Minds magazine, website, or radio shows. They are now sponsors, and last year they had a tremendous success bringing Phoenix. It's now 4 days long, more than 20 of us as speakers, and I'm very proud to enter there next month, second to the 26th of February, and anyone that's information on attending can simply go to the Open Minds website and find out information there, or Google the initials, Congress, which is IUF 2012, and it will bring you information on it. However, my guest, the story I'm best known for public attention, is the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, December 19th. And a year ago, December of 2010, on the 28th, actual 30th anniversary of the third night's event that my co-author Larry Warren was involved in. Myself and Larry, John Burroughs, Linda Howe, and Nick Pope were involved in a conference very close to the original location where it occurred, the village, town of Woodbridge, place. And this coming June, we will be following up with a bigger, better, and I am sure more intense, engaging conference, which will once again take place in Woodbridge, Suffolk. It will bring myself and Larry Warren and John back together, along with one or two other of these witnesses, and a British presenter on another well-known case there, and Travis Walton, who will be speaking in the United Kingdom for the first time in 19 years. As engaging as the Rendlesham story is, and as compelling as the information I'm sure that will be aired at the conference will be, if none of us showed up and it was just Travis, I'm sure they'd have a he is truly, for me, one of the most extraordinary, respected, and finest people in this field, with tremendous courage and really a world-class spokesman for the seriousness of such events. So very excited about that. For anyone, whether or not you'll be able to make it over from the States, or any of your listeners in the UK or abroad, information to be aware of that for the conference is, specifically, I'm going to give you an actual phone number here and an email address. Our organizer is named Gordon Goodger, Goodger, and you can call him directly from the States at 01144 7811 021330, or his email address, which is a lot easier, is info@spaceportuk.com. That's info@spaceportuk.com. My shameless plugs are now at an end.
Well, we talked about the Rendlesham Forest conference here, and Mack, in reading your book, when you talk about the Rendlesham Forest case, it seems to me like you come away from that believing that something really extraordinary happened.
Yeah, I mean, from the information I saw and read about, it just seems like something very odd happened there, and in that part of England, Anglia, if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, East Anglia
has a history of a lot of unusual stuff happening. So it's a fascinating case. I'm sure Peter knows way more about it than I do. We touch on it in a chapter in the book, but just extraordinary, and especially because you had someone like a high officer as Mr. Halt, who was out there seeing it for himself and recording it. Just a really fascinating story.
Yeah, Mack is right. In the United Kingdom, the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident is far and away regarded as best known, and I'm proud to say with the original publication of Larry Warren, my book Left in the Escape, the best documented UFO incident, military or otherwise, in the United Kingdom. And also, I think fits very well into Mack's book. Although this did not occur during the hot war, it occurred at a particularly tense time during the Cold War. And it was not, of course, just former Colonel Halt, but dozens of airmen and security police and other United States Air Force personnel, as well as the British people, civilian and otherwise. And even though we are now 31 years plus in, the controversy continues. Claims and counterclaims argued over, and it is a story that will never go away. It has captured my imagination in earnest since 1987. So our book, 9 years to write, 10 years to get into print. My interest and fascination in the case is unabated.
Well, what makes it most intriguing to me is the fact that, if these were extraterrestrial creatures or even people from the future, what it was that they were looking for at that location.
Yeah, well, for me, one thing that I have learned in more than 30 years as a specialty researcher and investigative writer in this area is there are certain things that we will probably never have definitive answers on. And frankly, I tend to back away from people, at least allegorically, who tell us that they do have the definitive answers. I mean, again, go off on a tangent here and what constitutes truth. For me, I'm a fairly plodding, real-world investigator, and for example, with the help of Matt Maloney, I first approached more than 20 years ago when he was in environmental laboratories in Wareham, Massachusetts. We had a soil analysis which he conducted, which absolutely blew my mind.
I still have some of that soil to this day.
Hold on to it. When the NSA takes me and Larry out, buy a new house with that stuff. The fact is that when you do this work, a lot of it, and I'm sure people in other paranormal areas of study may have similar opinions, although it's an engaging, fascinating pair of areas of study, there can be pretty dry times when you're trying to sort out the facts that make sense of allegations or alleged evidences, and this really took the top off of things. Triangulation is the name of the game when you're doing serious investigation. I don't necessarily mean 3 points on the compass. I mean, in this case, the witness identifies this exact spot as where he was when machine of undetermined origin appears. The area has a pre-existing history of paranormal activity and UFO activity, as noted. And photographically, it didn't look right. And then the analysis kind of cut to the chase. Showed that, number one, seeds that were germinated in control samples of the soil that we took were perfectly normal. Ones from the affected sample took longer to grow and ultimately were mutated strains. There was in excess of 4 times the amount of small metallic particles of sand that one would expect to find in the affected area, which really only suggested to us that a very powerful electromagnetic force had exerted itself there. And for me, the most shocking and most theatrical results was that the sand in the affected area, as opposed to the surrounding area, was no longer actually sand. It was on its way to being glass, something that had not able to reproduce in the laboratory. Now, this is one small tangent of a 9-year investigation in a book that runs 540 pages, but it is a hell of a story, and one that I'm particularly glad that Mack has touched on, because like any good book in the field that introduces readers to yet another important case or another aspect, will take some readers off on that direction and have them educate themselves more about it. Join us Suffolk, East Anglia, and
sure, and of course, if anybody wants to find out more, you can pick up Peter's book, Left and East Gate. You can also check out the episode that we did of Spooky Southcoast, where we devoted the entire show to the Rendlesham Forest case. We actually played Colonel Hall's tape in its entirety. So that's there if you want to go back into the archives and listen to that, either on our website or through iTunes or wherever you get podcasts. But before we let you go, Peter, Mack, I was reading in your book about a particular case from 1947 that's, kind of famous, the Roswell case. And I noticed that you come to some pretty interesting conclusions. Now, we've talked about Roswell here quite a bit in the past. We've had our Roswell Smackdown show where we had a pro and con of debate going back and forth. We've talked to Jesse Marcel Jr. We've covered this story from a lot of different angles, but your angle on it kind of interests me a little bit, because it seems like you don't really think anything extraterrestrial on it.
Well, no, I don't. I guess I might be in the minority on this, but I'll just tell you really quickly a few reasons why. First of all, we touch on it briefly in the book, but I've always been, a fan of the whole Roswell incident and read a lot about it, going back 20 years ago. In fact, at one point, some group was going to actually do an archaeological dig on the site where the debris was found, and they were looking for volunteers, and I was going to volunteer to go down there to help out in that. I don't think they ever did that, but someone should maybe do that at some point. But then,
done.
just as I kind of looked into it more, and I saw photographs of what the tail of the spy balloon that they were using at the time laid out next to pictures of the debris, and yeah, they just match up. They just match up. And to me, it looks like those photos are basically photos from the debris of a spy balloon that somehow crashed. Another reason that I think this way is, as I said before, since I was a little kid, I would read every UFO book that I could get my hands on, and I grew up in the late 50s and 60s, and there was no mention of Roswell in any of these books. It just kind of came back to life in the late 70s and kind of exploded from there. And then just, in some of the books that are out there now, it seems like, they're claiming that, dozens or a dozen UFOs crashed, and there were, dozens of bodies and so on and so forth. And, just as I said before, it just seems like to be too many moving parts to this story. I'm not saying that, the U.S. or some other country hasn't recovered crash discs from other locations, and who knows. But I really just don't think anything happened at Roswell. I'd like to be convinced otherwise, but I just don't think anything did.
Well, first, you've got a couple of things that are incorrect. Number one, if you're referring to the photographs with Jesse Marcel and at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he was forced to take pictures with that stage debris. The debris was actually in the office with the press before Marcel actually departed the plane with the original debris. And this comes directly from his son, as well as several other people that interviewed him directly. Not only that, there are several other people that also handled the material back and forth off the plane before, like I said, that those pictures were even taken. So we know that the pictures that you're talking about are staged. That's no if, that's no and, that's no but. That's definitely a staged event. There's also been over 100 different people that have handled the debris that have come across in written statements about what they've seen. So it was definitely not a balloon. I can't see how a balloon that's on an average of about 40 to 50 feet maximum in diameter can cause a debris field roughly 700 feet long by, almost 700 feet long and a couple hundred feet wide, and make furrows, because a lighter than air aircraft does not make a dent.
I would have to, first, Matthew is correct, and this is an area of study that I had not ventured into early on. A lot of people in the field, it's a preeminent case. I knew about it, but it really wasn't until 2007 that I really began my own investigation, maybe in the spirit that, Mack has looked into the cases that are in his book. And I have to tell you, I was completely convinced. I should also say here that for more than 3 years, I worked for the city of Roswell as a consultant and advisor on walking that line between responsible education, public relations, as well as tourism, quite simply. Also, you should be aware that, in fact, the Sci-Fi Channel, I remember now, maybe 6 years ago, did conduct a major archaeological dig out there, and they spent well into the 6 figures doing it and got some very impressive results. It resulted in a feature-length documentary, which you should definitely watch, as well as a companion book that was put together in a very unsensational manner. For me, one looks for all kinds of things. And a big break came, this is now over 10 years ago, you may remember the date then, but a press photographer who was working for the Air Force right at that time, in the summer of 1947, took a photograph of General Roger Ramey's instrumental in the cover-up, and there's no question about that. And at the time, it's an interesting photograph. It was probably taken with one of those great old-fashioned Graflex cameras that newspaper photographers used in the 1940s, which have extraordinarily high resolution. However, the technology to enlarge the photograph properly to the degree where there was even a chance of seeing what was apparently written on the cablegram that General Ramey was holding did not come for several more decades. You know what, Matt, now that I'm thinking about it, I think the story broke when I was running UFOcity.com, and we closed that down in 04. Right. But let me tell you, this for me was one of the breakthrough moments in just getting very excited about good old-fashioned investigation aided by technology, because you can see, and this is an undoctored close-up of that cable in this general's hand taken 48, 72 hours later. You see the words. There's obviously a certain holding it not straight out for you to see it. He's holding it at somewhat of an angle, but you can see words like saucer and crash and a number of other keys. Absolutely. Then there's another aspect of this, which is witness statements. Now, when I say witness statements relative to Roswell, I'm discussing individuals who have come forward or made themselves available. For more than 25 years now, the Fund for UFO Research did us all a tremendous service more than 20 years ago and sent a camera team, a documentary team, down to Roswell, where they videotaped something like 60 or 70 people who were around at that time. Now, here's the deal. Absolutely none of them wanted a penny in payment. None of them wanted to be famous or be on television. None of them wanted to or did write a book. There were witness statements from the widows of men who were directly involved, who made deathbed testimonies. And if you want to see this all compiled in a way that I feel is about as undeniable, that not only did something happen, but in fact, what is purported to have happened did happen. There's a lot of good literature on it, and also a lot of crap. But I would advise anybody interested in trying to get behind the human aspect of it to pick up or find a book called Witness to Roswell, written by Tom Carey and Don Schmidt. It is the ultimate compendium of individuals and their stories firsthand. And I've met a few of these men. Two of them are gone now that I've met, and they were well in their 80s when I did meet them. But they were involved. They had no axe to grind. They loved their country. They were not thrilled about breaking, ultimately, their national security oath in 1947. But in fact, the major contributing factor was that they watched on television and saw other men who had done it and wanted to make their peace with this before they passed on, quite simply. There is physical evidence that purports to be metal from craft. For me, it's fascinating, but I guess we can't say it's definitive. There is a tremendous backlog of military documents, but I would respectfully suggest that you study this more. And if you have an opportunity to visit Roswell, go to the museum, look into picking up a copy of this book, and I think that you will see that there is not just compelling evidence, but enough evidence that one can look to this story as authentic beyond any reasonable doubt. Again, that is my point of view, but I'm informed and educated point of view.
Well, we're going to take a break, Peter, so we thank you for joining us. But before we do, I'm going to just say, Mac, my mind was made up on the Roswell incident when we had Commander Sinacito on the show, the actual Roswell alien who crashed and was then reincarnated.
Oh yeah, I just got a headache in my eye.
Well, there's one thing we forgot to mention about, Roswell was actually, not to mention itself, but the crash and stuff was mentioned in Easy Rider, which was done in the 60s, talking about the crash and the bodies being recovered from the UFO. If anybody wants to go back and look at the film,
that comes as far as I'm concerned.
All right.
Yeah, when you get Jack Nicholson backing you up, right?
Thanks so
Right,
much,
and
Peter.
my pleasure, guys, and have a great evening, and thank you for having me on this show.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
We will be right back talking more about UFOs and wartime with Mack Maloney. And Mack, I want to talk some more about 1947 and some of the strange goings on then, and then we'll talk about some more modern cases coming up. And if anybody has any questions for Mack or any questions about UFOs and wartime before the show is out, the numbers to call are 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. You can also email us spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com or jump in the chat room on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com, and we'll be right back with more here on, what's the name of the show? Spooky South Coast. I could have said it a few more times.
Confusion ever someone or have sudden trouble at speaking, understanding?
Understanding trouble? Have you sudden have or speaking someone ever confusion?
Have you ever had sudden confusion, trouble speaking, or understanding someone?
It could be one of the 5 signs of stroke.
Sudden weakness or numbness of the face, arm, or leg.
Sudden trouble with vision in one or both eyes.
Suddenly having trouble walking or difficulty with balance.
Or a sudden intense headache that comes out of nowhere.
If you or someone you know has any of these symptoms, don't wait. Call 911 immediately. You could make a difference in someone's life, someone you love, maybe even your own.
It's late until wait. Don't too.
Don't wait until it's too late. Time lost is brain lost.
Find out more at powertoendstroke.org. Brought to you by the American Heart Association, American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
AM 1420, WBSM, with a very romantic, very special Valentine's Day giveaway. We begin with jewelry from A&A Jewelers in the Dartmouth Town Center. Then, we had some very sweet treats from Emma Jean's Cupcake Factory, Ice Cream Shop, and Candy House of Fairhaven. Then, top it off with dinner for 2 at the Galley Grill, located at White's in Westport. To enter this fabulous Valentine's Day giveaway, simply log on to WBSM.com. Pete Braley and Neil White will announce the winner on Wednesday. Make it the best Valentine's Day ever with AM 1420 WBSM.
Major League Baseball getting in on the action. Hi, I'm Michael Young. I'm Chris Young. I'm a Cardinals fan, and we're getting in on the action. Thousands of high school students across the country are getting in on the action by volunteering in their teams. Action team of high school students join Volunteers of America and Major League Baseball players to help train and inspire the next generation of volunteers. If you can start an action team in your city, so you too can get in on the action. Are you in? Combo's Action Team got it. Are you in?
AM 1420, WBSM, your Super Bowl station. It's time for the rematch. Patriots versus the Giants. Hear all the action live from Indy as Brady, Gronkowski, Welker, and the team look to show Eli Manning and company who the championship team is.
That's another touchdown!
Super Bowl 46, brought to you by Sullivan Tire, Beltone, by Fall River Ford, Hamill, Waxler, Allen & Collins, and by Pilgrim Bank on AM 1420 WBSM.
Welcome back to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Moniz. Matt Costa, you are an enabler, sir. Every time you play that, you buy David Crosby a new liver. You allow him to continue his partying ways. Alright, welcome back to the show where we talk about the paranormal. We occasionally poke fun at Asian rock stars as well. That's what we do. Don't tell Gary Patterson I said that, because anyone come back on the show. But we are talking with Mack Maloney about his book UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. And there's some things in here that I didn't know, lots of things that I didn't know. And so I definitely recommend picking it up. You can pick it up pretty much anywhere books are sold, right, Mack?
Right. It's published by Penguin Books, and it's at really every bookstore across the country. But going on to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, my publisher wants me to mention them too, or my website. You can get it, online at a lot of different places.
And of course, you can go to MackMaloney.com to find out all the information about not only this book, but all of Mack's other books as well. Is there going to be more nonfiction stuff coming down the pike, or are you going to go back to the fiction stuff?
No, I'm back to the fiction stuff for a little while. In fact, I get another book coming out on Monday. I do a series called The Pirate Hunt. It's about special ops soldiers going after the Somali pirates. And the third book in that series is coming out on Monday. And then I just got to kind of wind down a little bit from this, and then talk to my publisher to see if we want to do another UFO book or do something, maybe another paranormal book, not necessarily UFOs, but we'll see. So,
well, just keep us up to date with everything that you're working on. And I want to take it back to 1947 for a minute, because one of the cases that we hear about all the time is the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which is supposedly the birth of the term flying saucer. But there's some interesting connotations between Kenneth Arnold and another sighting that happened a few days before his sighting.
Right, that's the Maury Island incident, and it's really probably the strangest story in the book, and I'll try to give a short version of it. What happened was, as you say, a few days before Kenneth Arnold saw his, flying saucers over Mount Rainier, and from that incident came the term flying saucers. A few days before that happened, there was an incident off of Tacoma, Washington, in which a gentleman named Dahl, D-A-H-L, was out in a boat with several people in Tacoma Bay, and what they were doing was they were retrieving trees that had been cut down by the lumbering companies up there. Some of them would get away and get in the water, and they would retrieve them and bring them back to the lumber companies. A lot of lumber companies up in Tacoma. So anyway, they saw these 5 UFOs suddenly, saucer-shaped craft, suddenly come almost right down on top of them. One of them seemed to be in some kind of distress. The other UFOs kind of got it, surrounded it, and, want of a better word, sent a charge to it, and it seemed to regain its capabilities, and in doing so, it expelled this stuff that they called slag. Slag is actually the byproduct of steel making, but there's no steel making up in this part of the country. But anyway, these people run this boat, and they're seeing this, and they beach the boat on Maury Island, and they take cover while all this strange stuff is going on, and then the UFOs just take off in a blink of an eye, and they're gone. So Mr. Dow and his crew retrieved some of the slag, went back to Tacoma, and vowed not to say anything to anyone about this. The next day, a gentleman came to Dow's house, and he was dressed in black, as it turns out, and he kind of suggested he was an insurance salesman, invited Dow out to breakfast. They went out to breakfast, and as soon as they started this little meeting, the man in black proceeded to tell Dow everything that had happened to him the day before on Maury Island. This guy knew everything that had happened, and he basically threatened Dow to keep his mouth shut, or bad luck would come to him and his family. Later on that day, Dow decided not to keep his mouth shut, and he told the whole story to his boss, a gentleman named Fred Chrisman. And you got to remember that name because it's important later on in the story. And Chrisman goes out to Maury Island, and he claims he saw flying saucers out there too. So shortly after that, now this is all happened before the Kenneth Arnold sighting happened. Then the Kenneth Arnold sighting happens, and all of a sudden people seeing flying saucers everywhere. Chrisman and Dow get a hold of a magazine editor in Chicago, and this guy is interested in doing a story on this. And he's going to send a reporter out to Tacoma to write the story. And who does the reporter turn out to be but Kenneth Arnold? Now, Kenneth Arnold wasn't a journalist at all. He was an independent businessman, but all of a sudden he's thrown in the middle of this flying saucer controversy. So he goes out, he gets into a hotel room with Crispin and Dow and starts interviewing them. As this interview is taking place, the phone rings, and it's a newspaper reporter from a Tacoma newspaper close by saying, I don't know who you people are, but what you're doing, but I have someone on the other line who's telling me everything that you are saying inside your hotel room. So now Arnold and Crispin and Dow search the hotel room for bugs and so on, listening devices, can't find anything. This completely freaks them out. They decide to get the military involved. The military sends up 2 officers from a air base in California, 2 intelligence officers, fly up in a B-25 airplane. They land in Tacoma. Now they join them the next day in this hotel room. Crispin and Dow give them the whole story. They give them a sample of this slag material. The Air Force officers get back on their plane, fly back to California. 30 minutes later, they're dead. Their plane crashed very close to where Kenneth Arnold saw his flying saucers. Now, Kenneth Arnold finds this out. He decides, I've had enough of this, so he calls the magazine in Chicago and said, I'm off the case, I don't want to do this anymore. He gets in his plane, and his plane almost crashes. And it's determined later on that maybe something had been tampered with in his engine. The FBI got involved. We saw cables between Hoover and his FBI agent here at the time who said that, the people involved in this is not a hoax. They swear that this happened. A lot of people that say it was a hoax. People say if you really look at this, and you kind of strip away the top layer of it, what it looks like has all the signs of a counterintelligence operation to kind of dispel the notions of UFOs. It's a very, very strange case, and no one ever figured out exactly what happened. But the interesting thing about Fred Crispin, boss, is that later on he was called before a congressional committee investigating the JFK assassination, because in the JFK assassination, 3 quote-unquote hobos were found close to the assassination site up on the railroad tracks, and one of them had Fred Crispin's name and number in his pocket. What all this means, no one has ever been able to figure it out, but for sure it's one of the strangest cases in all of UFO history.
Absolutely. It certainly does tie in the idea of a CIA connection.
We left out the one interesting fact, the dog getting killed.
And the dog was killed during this, right? And they never figured out what this flag was either.
Actually, they did. I know some people that did.
What was it?
It's aluminum. Now, what's interesting is there's been several other cases where this slag aluminum has been seen being ejected from craft. As a matter of fact, there are several samples of it that have been analyzed by a number of people.
Yeah, just a strange story. Very strange.
The whole Maury Island. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this. There's been actually a couple of sightings that happened there afterwards.
Well, like I said, really, I had heard about it before, and then we got into it a little bit more when we researched the book. But just a weird story, weird kind of chilling story.
And of course, we go from a time talking about World War I, World War II, when a lot of these sightings were reported from the pilots to their superiors, and even then we started to see kind of the collapse of that, kind of see the choking out of these stories a little bit. But now you move into this era of the 50s, the 60s, and into the 70s, where we're actually seeing some serious investigation into UFOs. But how serious were they trying to find the answers?
Well, it turns out not very serious at all, or at least not to the public eye. When in 1947-48, the Air Force actually opened up. Well, they gave the job of finding out whether UFOs were real or not to part of the UFOs called the ATIC, and they were scientists and engineers, and they were given about 6 months to look into it and to come back with a report on whether UFOs were quote-unquote real. Now, they did finally come up with this report, and their conclusion was, yes, they are real. When people see UFOs, they're not hallucinating, it's not a hoax. People actually see things, and they're not U.S.-made, and they're not Russian-made, so what are they? But, make a long story short, the Pentagon basically said to them, well, that's not the conclusion we wanted you to come to.
Right.
So they sent them away and said, do another study, and when that second study came back, And I'm kind of constricting events here a little bit. When that second study came back, basically what they said was, no, there's nothing to it. And the Air Force came out with a famous quote that, all UFO sightings are either the work of people who are delusional or hoaxes or religious fanatics and crackpots. And it was that point, that it had, and the Air Force, had the courage to really do a scientific study on what UFOs were. It would have been then, and history would have been changed. But now, they chose to cover it up then, and the cover-up, continues today. What really kind of set their plans awry, though, was that 6 months later, after all this happened, the Korean War started. And all of a sudden, you have all these high-tech jet fighters flying over Korea. It's kind of a small country, relatively speaking. A lot of these airplanes have radar in them. You got radar on the ground, radar in ships offshore. So, and lots of UFOs were spotted during the Korean War. So now the Air Force, at the very least, is in a position of saying that, their pilots are crackpots, hoaxers, religious fanatics. They couldn't do that. So every UFO sighting that was reported by their pilots during the Korean War, they had to come up with these, crazy explanations from, like weather balloons and flares and so on and so forth. But a lot of people think that because so many UFOs were sighted over Korea, that's why Project Blue Book was started. And even though it has its critics, Project Blue Book probably did more good work than bad work, as far as the Air Force was concerned, investigating UFOs through the 50s and 60s. Didn't do a lot of work, but they did do some interesting stuff. So, once again, the Air Force, by covering it up, actually painted themselves into a corner. And, in many ways, they're still painted into that corner today.
Well, part of that is due to the first study you were talking about, where they came out with something unknown, it's called Project Sign. Then the second one where they wanted the negative answer was called Project Grudge.
Right, yeah.
And then they went on with Project Blue Book, which eventually concluded that there was no significant or interest in terms of national security.
Right.
Even though they left out 114 cases that they didn't want to answer.
Right.
And they've continued to accept reports, but haven't followed up on them in any official capacity since the close of Blue Book. And you also have another reason being the Condon report, which actually had its results written before the study started.
That's a whole different case. Yeah. Well, we have about 3 minutes left in this show, Mac. But before we let you go, I want to ask you, what's one of the most profound, more recent UFO sightings in the current war that we're engaged with, this war on terror?
Well, book goes until the end of the first Gulf War, and we include some stories in there where people, we kept coming upon a story that a UFO was shot down during the first Gulf War, that in between the first and second Gulf War, that there's a story that Saddam forces shot down UFO, reverse engineered it, created a super weapon, and that's what we were really looking for when we invaded Iraq. Things of that nature. I've seen videotapes of Marines on night duty in Iraq, this Iraq war, where they're picking up UFOs with their night vision equipment. I've talked to people I know some people who work with the U.S. intelligence agencies that say that this stuff is going on all the time over the Persian Gulf and in Afghanistan, and frankly, in our skies too. There's been hundreds of UFO intercepts since 9/11, only because we send up fighters now to check anything coming into our airspace. Before 9/11, you didn't do that, but now you have to. And as a result of a lot of these jets being scrambled, they're seeing a lot more UFO, having a lot more UFO sightings. And of course, you don't hear about that stuff. So there's all kinds of activity going on. And if this our theory holds that UFOs are seen more in wartime or when we're preparing for war, then that just means that there's probably a whole lot of sightings from the Iraq and the Afghan war that we'll hear about.
I think it'll come out in the sequel.
We'll see.
All right, the book is called UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. The author is Mack Maloney, and you can go to his website, mackmaloney.com, to find out more and to follow along. And I know that Mack's got lots of other interviews planned as well. So, Mack, we'd love to have you come back on in the future and talk some more about this.
Well, I would love to do it. Thanks very much for having me.
All right, we'll be in touch. Stay in touch with us.
Thank you.
All right, have a great night.
Thanks.
Again, That was Mack Maloney. The book is called UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. I highly recommend it.
I want to get it done.
It's a great book. You can take this one home and read it if you want. Just make sure I get it back so I can keep it on our bookshelf. My office at home is dominated by a bookshelf with all the books from all of our past guests, so we have them readily accessible. And who knows, someday when we all croak, they can start the Spooky Southcoast Memorial Library out here. So again, just real quickly, I just want to remind everybody of a few things. Of course, you can always hear Spooky Southcoast while on the go at Stitcher Radio. It's a free news and talk mobile application. The latest episode is always available for you with no syncing needed and no memory wasted. It's available for your iPhone, your Palm Pre, Android phones, or your BlackBerry. Just go to Stitcher.com or check out the App Store for whoever your mobile phone operating system is. Right? How's the archive update going? I don't get to put you on the spot. Okay, because I get some emails from people and I try to tell them to just go to iTunes. It's always, we now make sure that before we leave here, we upload the show to iTunes. Yeah, they are. But I have some ideas we'll have a meeting, you and Chris, and I have some ideas of maybe how we can make it simpler for idiots like me to be able to upload things to the site. Remember the old blog? That worked out well. It was easy for me, although it looks much cooler now. At least I could handle that. But we'll get them. But if not, iTunes, that's the place to go. They're free. It doesn't cost anything to get them off iTunes. And you can also listen to them right in iTunes too. You don't have to download them if you want to. And of course, Stitcher is another great way. No downloading the Stitcher either. You can listen to them that way as well. And one more time, I just want to tell you more about the Slater Mill event, the Graveyard Shift at Slater Mill event. It's coming up on April 21st. It's going to be from 6 p.m. until 2 a.m. at the Slater Mill Museum in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Now, it's going to be just like all of our other Legend Trips events where you get dinner, you get lectures, you get a Q&A with the speakers, you get to hang out with the speakers, you get to investigate alongside the speakers. And we do it a little bit different than some of these other events that you might have been to. We have a pretty good structure that works really well, and it keeps the group small, and it keeps the investigation moving all along. Tickets are $99, and we also have a special rate if you want to stay at the Comfort Inn just down the street from Slater Mill. You can get the room for $79 a night, as long as you mention the special code that's on the Legend Trips website. So it's just a great event. I'm excited for it because I haven't investigated there yet. And we're going to have Keith and Carl Johnson along, Tiffany Rice, Pam Padovano. We're going to have myself, Moniz, Andrew Lake, Matt Costa. You can come too if you don't have to come to run the show. Or come for the dinner, but let's go run the show. Free eats. It's worth driving to Pawtucket for free eats, isn't it? It is. There you go. Alright. Well, so again, legendtrips.com is the website. It's also linked up at the front page of SpookySouthcoast.com as well. We'll be back next week. I'm not going to the Super Bowl. So we'll be back next week, and we will have our guest, Deanna Kelly Said, to talk about her book, Paranormal Obsession. We'll talk about some of her new works that are out there as well. It's going to be a good night where, you know how we like to gripe sometimes about what the paranormal, quote-unquote, media is doing to the field of paranormal research? Well, next week we're going to get into all that more with Deanna Said. So you want to definitely come back for that show. We'll be here. Until then, for Matt Costa, for Matt Moniz, for Chris Balzano, stay spectacular.
First with local news, talk, and sports. And this is WBSM New Bedford, AM 1420. WBSM, a Cumulus station.
From ABC News, I'm Sharon Reed. Nearly 2 months after suspending his own presidential campaign and just 2 days before the Florida primary, Herman Cain is out with an endorsement.
I hereby officially and enthusiastically endorse Newt Gingrich for President of the United States.
But with Gingrich trailing Mitt Romney in the latest Florida polling, how much can the Tea Party favorite's support help?
The way the Herman Cain endorsement can help Gingrich in Florida is it can help him try to say he is the conservative alternative to Mitt Romney. Because it's not just Herman Cain. It's Rick Perry. It's Sarah Palin. It is those who have been associated with the Tea Party movement, 3 pretty prominent figures coming out and saying that the conservative alternative is Newt Gingrich.
That's ABC senior political correspondent Jonathan Karl in Orlando. Mitt Romney's been on the attack in Florida, airing a political campaign ad of a news report from the day Gingrich was fined by the House for ethics violations. Another Republican candidate is taking time off to deal with his ailing young daughter. Rick Santorum's 3-year-old Bella, who has a life-threatening genetic condition, has been hospitalized in Philadelphia. ABC's Shoshana Walsh has been following the Santorum campaign.
The campaign has been plagued recently by rumors that Rick Santorum is getting out of the race, but the campaign denies that this has anything to do with that, and it's just about the health of their daughter, Bella.
Dozens of Occupy demonstrators are being arrested in Oakland, California, after trying to take over a vacant building. Police used tear gas and flash grenades to try to break up the crowd. St. Louis was the site of the nation's first big formal welcome home celebration for returning Iraqi war veterans. Craig Schneider helped organize Saturday's big parade.
You welcome them back home, you look them in the eyes, and you formally thank them for what they've done.
About 600 vets took